Hi, second graders, and welcome back to another day of listening and learning with Miss Catrone. So as you know, we are in Domain 9, which is all about the American Civil War. And today we're on Lesson 10. And the title of our lesson today is Ulysses S Grant. So we're going to listen to find out who he is and what important thing he did. Now, before we talk about him, let's review someone that we've learned about a couple days ago. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to bring us right to this guy. Now, if you'll remember, his name is Robert E. Lee, and he is a general for the Confederate Army. Now, if you remember anything about him, he lived in the home state of Virginia, and at first he didn't want to participate in the Civil War because he didn't think that it was good for the country. He didn't think that the Confederacy should secede from the United States, but in the end, he supported his home state, and he was a general for the Confederate Army. Now, if you'll remember, people really loved and respected him. They waved as he came by, they clapped for him. He had a lot of respect from his soldiers. Now, that's all we're going to talk about him today, but we're going to listen today as we read about Ulysses S. Grant, and we're going to find out, he's also a general. We're going to find out how he's the same as Commander Lee and how he's different from Commander Lee. So as we listen, I want you to think about how are they the same or similar, and how are they different? All right, without further ado, let's get started. Ulysses S. Grant. The date was May 4th, 1864. Hey, I know someone in our class that has that birthday. Well, years and years later, but May 4th. The day before, marching with the strength of over 118,000 soldiers, the Army of the Potomac crossed the Rapidan River in the middle of Virginia. The Blue Ridge Mountains lay to the west, and to the east lay miles of dark forests and the Confederate Army under command of Robert E. Lee. General Lee had roughly 60,000 men under his command, half as many as the Union Army, but they were ready to put up a strong fight. The Union Army was commanded by Ulysses S. Grant, and let's see, he is the leader in this picture. He was no stranger to battle. He had served in the Army for over 25 years, starting when he was just 17 years old, just like Robert E. Lee. The Civil War was not his first war either. Like the Confederate General Robert E. Lee, General Grant had fought in another war. General Ulysses S. Grant leaned against a post outside of his tent. The word post in this sentence means that it's a piece of wood or metal that is set in an upright position into the ground. The word post can also mean something by mail or to put up a sign, but in here it means the post or the piece of wood that he's leaning against. He warily watched as a long line of supply wagons carrying ammunition, food, and medical supplies rumbled past. The word ammunition refers to the bullets, cannonballs, etc. that are shot out of the weapons. These supply wagons made up the rear or backside of the army. The main body of the army, the soldiers who needed all of those supplies in order to fight, were miles ahead, deep in the forest, looking for the enemy. Who was the enemy to the Union Army? You're right, the Confederate Army. General Grant was now the general-in-chief of the entire Union Army. The only person who ranked higher than General Grant was President Lincoln. Grant took his orders from Lincoln, and everyone else took their orders from Grant. Does anybody remember what title the president has as its highest ranking commander? What is that called? It's called Commander-in-Chief, if you didn't remember. All right, here we have Grant going out west. Every general in the war faced hard choices and had heavy responsibilities, with the lives of thousands of soldiers in his hands. But in 1864, no general had more worries than General Grant. Why do you think General Grant had so many worries? Let's find out. General Grant had spent the first 3 years of the Civil War fighting farther west, away from the action in Virginia. His most impressive victory in the early years of the war came at Vicksburg, a city in Mississippi. The same day that the Union Army had won the Battle of Gettysburg, General Grant won the Battle of Vicksburg after 2 long, hard months. The victory gave the Union final control over the entire Mississippi River, which in turn would make it easier for the Union to take over the rest of the South. The Mississippi River was important because the Union could use it to send troops and supplies from the north to the south. It was easier to use a river to do this because there were no cars or trucks yet, and so there were no highways like we have today. We've learned about another important waterway with the Erie Canal, and this one is kind of similar. It's how they would transport their goods. To win the Civil War, the Union needed to take control of the South, including all of its cities and roads. Nobody in the North expected this to be so difficult. The Union had more than 1 million men in uniform. What color was the Union Army uniform, do you remember? They fought in the color blue. Oops, lost my spot. There we go. By the end of the Civil War, 1 out of every 10 Union soldiers was African American, and 1 out of 4 Union soldiers was African American. By the end of the Civil War, 1 out of every 10 Union soldiers was African American, and 1 out of 4 Union soldiers was African American. I don't really understand that sentence. Let's see if we can find out. There's a little note next to it. Late in the war, the U.S. Congress passed a bill that gave equal pay, that's awesome, to the African American soldiers who fought to help save the Union and bring freedom from slavery. So that's awesome that they're finally getting paid. Factories in the North had been working day and night for years, producing weapons, uniforms, blankets, food rations, wagons, and all the other things the Army needed. Rations meant the amount of foods and other materials set aside for each person. Was all of this production from factories good for the Northern economy? Yeah, it was, because when they're producing things, they can sell them, and it's very good for their economy. The Yankees, as the Union soldiers were nicknamed, had everything they needed to fight and win the war. What was the nickname for the Union soldiers? It was the Yankees. Why do you think the North expected to win so easily? Why do you think the North expected to win so easily? Well, we know they have over 1 million soldiers, and we know that they have all the supplies that they need from the factories. Maybe that's why they thought they would win. The Confederates, or rebels, as they were often called, did not have as many men as the Union. They had less soldiers. The South did not have many factories. Many of those it did have early in the war had been destroyed or captured by 1864. Confederate soldiers marched to battle without shoes, without enough food, and sometimes without enough ammunition. What is ammunition again? Oh yeah, the bullets and the cannonballs that they put in their weapons. Yet even though they were exhausted and starved, the Confederates somehow held on and managed to keep fighting. So the Union is looking like it's probably going to win because they have more soldiers and more ammunition. So this is General Grant. Grant was not the general-in-chief of the Union Army at the beginning of the Civil War. Throughout the war, Lincoln had trouble with some of his top Union generals. It wasn't that they were bad generals. They could win battles and capture enemy forts and towns, but they made mistakes as well. They often waited too long to attack or failed to chase the Confederates when they were on the run. Basically, Lincoln felt that the Union generals were never aggressive or forceful enough. But Grant was different. General Grant had won the long battle of Vicksburg because he was stubborn and unafraid. He kept fighting and attacking until the enemy surrendered or gave up. Lincoln put General Grant in charge of the entire Union Army because General Grant promised that he would do whatever it took to win. He would chase General Robert E. Lee and his army all over Virginia, and he would not stop until the war was finished. This outlook earned him the nickname Unconditional Surrender, because he would accept nothing less from the Confederate Army than a complete surrender. Do you think that General Grant will be able to get the Confederate Army to completely surrender? Maybe. If he's as ruthless as he seems, maybe he will. Here we have Grant reading a letter from Lincoln. General Grant removed a folded letter from his breast pocket. President Lincoln had sent this letter a few days earlier. It did not contain any vital or necessary information or new orders. It was just a simple letter sent to wish him good luck in battle. Grant reread the letter written in the president's own handwriting. Lieutenant General Grant, not expecting to see you again before you march into Virginia, I wish to tell you that I am entirely satisfied, or that I am entirely happy, with what you have done up to this time. You are alert and self-reliant, and pleased with this, I do not wish to control your actions in any way. If there is anything wanting which is within my power to give, do not fail to let me know it. And now, with a brave army and a just cause, or a worthy cause, may God sustain you, or may God keep you strong. Yours very truly, A. Lincoln. How cool would it have been to get a letter from the president and saying all those kind things about how he is such a good general. All right, this is the Battle of the Wilderness. The next day, May 5th, in the forest near Fredericksburg, Virginia, the main body of Grant's army clashed with General Lee's army in one of the wildest battles of the war. In those days, armies always preferred to fight in open fields where it was easier to move cannons and large groups of men, and easier for generals to see what was happening. This time, though, the armies met deep in the woods, where the tree and plant growth was so heavy that the soldiers could barely see one another. This was called the Battle of the Wilderness, and it was the very first time Generals Grant and Lee faced each other in a battle. It was a very chaotic battle. Thousands were killed and wounded. At the end of the day, both armies limped away with no clear winner in the battle. We still don't have a winner. This is our girl Clara Barton again. She's coming to tend to wounded soldiers. After the battle, many of the Union wounded were taken to churches and homes in the nearby city of Fredericksburg. Clara Barton was there in one of those churches, tending to wounded soldiers. Who was Clara Barton again? And what was her nickname? Yeah, she was the nurse that would come tend to the wounded soldiers, and her nickname was Angel of the Battlefield. The next day, hundreds more wounded soldiers were brought in from yet another battle, and on it went. The armies of Grant and Lee met again and again during the months that followed. Sometimes Grant won the battle, sometimes Lee won the battle, and sometimes nobody won. But with each battle, the Confederate Army got a little smaller and that much closer to final defeat, or failure to win. Does this last sentence give you a clue about who will win the war? Let me read it again. But with each battle, the Confederate Army got a little smaller and that much closer to final defeat, or failure to win. Gives me a clue about who's going to win. Alrighty, guys, the next thing that we have are some questions. And if you just want to listen to the questions for this round, we'll kind of go over the answers a little bit, and then they'll be in a quiz for you to answer when the video is all done. All right, so here we have this guy, and then who is pictured in this image? Yeah, it's Ulysses S Grant. And what important job did Ulysses S Grant have during the Civil War? What important job did he have? He was general of the Union Army. Good job. Was he commander at the beginning of the Civil War? No, he wasn't commander in the beginning. Why did President Lincoln ask him to take over? if you remember the story, it said that Lincoln was kind of unhappy with the other generals that came before him. He thought that they weren't aggressive enough, but he knew that Ulysses S. Grant was known for being an aggressive general, and he would do whatever it took to win. Why was Grant given the nickname Unconditional Surrender? Why was he given the nickname Unconditional Surrender? If you remember, he accepted nothing less than total surrender from his enemies. In the read aloud, you heard that General Grant won the Battle of Vicksburg because he was stubborn and unafraid. How might being stubborn and unafraid help someone win a battle in war? I think if you're stubborn, then you're going to stick to your guns and not let someone take over. And if you're unafraid, then you're not going to be scared in the battle. You're going to be really brave and do whatever it takes to win. Alrighty. What nickname was given to Union soldiers? What nickname was given to the Union soldiers? It was the Yankees. And what nickname was given to the Confederate soldiers? The rebels, yeah, because they rebelled against the United States. How did the two armies compare as being equipped to fight? How did the two armies compare? How did the Union Army and the Confederate Army, were they equipped to fight? Did they have the same number of men and weapons? Who had more? Yeah, the Union Army had so many more soldiers, and they also had way more equipment because they lived where the factories were, where the equipment, the ammunition was being built. Alrighty, guys, that is all the questions that I have for you today. Again, I'm gonna put these in a quiz for you to complete after you watch the video. So it'll be right next to it on Google Classroom. Now we're gonna move into our vocabulary word of the day, and our word for today is defeat. I'm gonna say it, defeat, and you're gonna say it. Good job. In the read aloud, you heard this sentence. With each battle, the Confederate Army got a little smaller and that much closer to final defeat. A defeat is a failure to win. Here's it in a sentence. Brian scored the final point that caused the other team's defeat. Have you ever experienced a loss or defeat? Or have you ever read about, heard about, or seen a defeat in a movie or TV show? I want you, in the quiz, there's going to be a spot for you to write a sentence using the word defeat. I could say that my soccer team got defeated by my opponent, and that means that we lost to them. All right, guys, this is a section where we're going to talk about an antonym. Remember, antonym means opposite. So if our word is defeat, what is a word that's the opposite or the antonym? Maybe to win. So for this part, we're going to decide if the sentence is talking about a defeat or about a win. Will beat his opponent at checkers. Will beat his opponent at checkers. That one's a win. Number 2, Lily missed making the goal for her soccer team. Lily missed making the goal for her soccer team. That's a defeat. Number 3, Janet made a basket at the very last minute, leading her team to victory. Janet made a basket at the very last minute, leading her team to victory. That's a win. Robert made the lowest score in the video game against his sister. Robert made the lowest score in the video game against his sister. That's a defeat. Patrick ranked highest in the spelling bee. Patrick ranked highest in the spelling bee. That is a win. Danny lost the bike race against his friend. Danny lost the bike race against his friend. That's a defeat. Alrighty, guys, that is all we're going to have time for today. I hope you enjoyed this story about the great General Ulysses S. Grant. And I can't wait to read tomorrow's story to you. But for now, make sure you head over and you complete that quiz, because that's how you're going to get credit for today's lesson. Thank you for joining me, and I can't wait to talk soon. Bye, guys.